Hi, everybody. I'm going to continue a little bit with my theme about Canadian publishing and the choices that it makes for manuscript selection and publication. Now, uh, as everybody who follows the publishing industry in Canada knows, sales over the past couple of decades have gone down, not up. Traditionally, Canadian books and magazines, and I'm thinking here of English language material. Unfortunately, there tends to be a division between English language and French language production in Canada. Je ne suis pas d'accord avec ça, mais that's how it is. In any case, what is happening is that there was a study, a quite well-researched study a few years ago called the More Canada Report, which observed, sadly, that book and magazine sales by Canadian-owned publishing houses are sinking. And they have gone down to half of that 25% number. In other words, approximately 12.5% of all the books and magazines that are bought by Canadians are published by Canadian-owned publishing houses and Canadian-owned magazines. Canadians consume a lot of cultural product, but close to 90% of it is not strictly speaking Canadian. It's the mode of production is out of whack. Now, there are a number of things that could be done, and I think should be done to rectify this situation. I don't think it's really fair or healthy to anybody working in culture in Canada or any Canadian citizens like me living overseas. And one suggestion that I personally have is that Canadian-owned publishing houses start thinking a little bit more carefully about the kinds of themes and topics that would appeal to general readers and not just juries on prize committees. And the suggestions that I have, because I have produced a lot of work over the course of my lifetime. I've written something like 1 million words that are polished. I published academic articles. I published non-academic criticism. I've published short stories. I've published poetry. And I published a novel online through an American magazine. That particular novel is set in the United States. Most of my work is not. But I'm very glad I did write that particular manuscript, because otherwise I would really be particularly obscure. In any case, I'm going to go over the themes and artistic approach of a couple of the manuscripts that I have made that are not published. And again, I realize there's a fine line between self-promotion and just sort of explaining an opinion. And I hope I'll be able to sort of maintain that balance. I think it's fair in this day and age to bring attention to what one has done. In any case, I'm going to show you a piece of artwork. And this is from one of the first novels that I wrote, in which I borrowed quite heavily from the approach, the style of screenplay writing. And I call this kind of novel a screenplay novel. I'm not the first person to have thought of this idea. But I am, as far as I know, the first person to have included well-honed, carefully done visuals. And I think that this sort of art and text combination, which deliberately tries to be cinematic, is an idea that has a big future if only a publishing house would take a chance on it. In any case, this is some of the artwork for this particular novel. Now, one other thing, the novel, by the way, is called Truth Marathon, and it's set for the most part in Toronto around 2005, 2006, a time when the world was transfixed with events in the Middle East, the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. Both those wars were raging, and the impact of post 9/11 geopolitics was making itself felt globally. Now, one aspect to the to that whole situation was as the years went by, people became more and more kind of cognizant of the fact that the invasion of Iraq in particular was not necessary, and that Iraq had no particular connection to 9/11. Now, the story, Truth Marathon, centers on this fellow here, Paul, who's a sort of youngish teacher. English is a foreign language, and he works at a language school in Toronto, and he develops a big crush on one of his coworkers, Sarah Back, who's a Korean Canadian. And as he gets to know her, he starts to realize that Asian history is very complicated and is something that he really doesn't grasp very well. He also starts to realize that distant historical effects can resonate quite strongly in the present. And finally, he realizes that the sort of geopolitical games that were played during the 20th century in Asia have a big sort of parallel with the kind of geopolitical situations that we find ourselves in now in the 21st century. I'm proud of this manuscript. For example, in this manuscript, which I finished in 2006, I point out that the possibility that there was Saudi involvement in 9/11 is a possibility we should consider, and that proved to be the case. I also make the argument very strongly in the manuscript that the way we conceive of World War II is distorted in the sense that the impact of the war on the Eastern Front between Nazi Germany and the communist USSR is also poorly understood by Westerners, mainly for cultural reasons, because Canadians, English, British, and Americans tend instinctively to have a very sort of Western kind of concept of how that war developed. They tend to focus very much on D-Day and not so much what happened on the Eastern Front. Now, these sort of disparate historical strands do get sort of pulled together within the novel. But in any case, I think there was a kind of foresight to some of the ideas that I had in the novel. I think stylistically, it's interesting enough that people might give it a chance. And as I said earlier, I think this whole idea of combining a screenplay, sort of the text, sort of the kind of feel, the way screenplays move, the way they sort of move from scene to scene, is a good idea. And I think the inclusion of art in a novel is a good idea. Now, another novel that I wrote is about Canadian soldiers fighting at Juno Beach. And I not only wrote a novel for that, again, I did art, and I made a movie about it. And I'm going to just hold on a second here. I'm going to just show you some footage from that. Just give me a second. I hope the audio comes through. I'll just play this for a second.
Fade in, exterior, the skies over France, June the 6th, 1944, night, 3:30 a.m. The thrum of the turboprops outside the plane's fuselage, the coldness on skin of the air inside the plane, and then, when the fuselage door is opened, the sudden blast of it, the intense fury of the air, atmospheres being raced past by a plane that, even at slow speed, is traveling faster than any car, any motorcycle could conceivably go. The paratroopers lining up, trained to line up. But this drop, not a practice. The air outside seeming to mirror that reality, more cutting than during any practice drop, pure in its cold knife. Then the drop into the air, the sickening absence of floor, the paratroopers now each separate from each other, possibly a few comrades faintly visible in the night. The sound of air in parachute, the ground below softly distant, then finally rushing up to each soldier's boots, hitting.
So those are examples from 2 novel manuscripts. I've got 5 like this. And effectively, getting people within Canadian publishing in particular to look at these has been like pulling teeth. And one reason has been partly because I think there's a lot of resistance on the part. In fact, I know more than one publisher who has said this outright. There's resistance to publishing books with artwork in it. And frankly, I think the reason for that is just stubbornness. And no small degree of laziness. And second of all, I do think that there is a weird sort of gap right now in the way Canadians think about mid-20th century history, particularly Canada's involvement in World War II. It is obviously something that needs to be fictionalized. But at the same time, there is widespread disinterest in it. Now, there is a strong interest in Canada's history, especially in terms of revising the way we conceive of Indigenous settler relations and that kind of thing. And I think that's great. And I think we should continue with that. And similarly, there's much more focus on diversity issues, sort of bringing up these ignored histories, women, people of color, and so forth. And again, I think that's great. But one of the biggest problems with Canadian cultural production is not so much that it's politically correct. That's sort of the conservative knee-jerk critique. I think it's more that Canada simply doesn't produce enough culture. So if we go back to that original figure of the kind of culture that Canadians buy, 90% of it almost is not produced by Canadians. And Canadian publishing houses, Canadian TV networks, Canadian movie producers, etc., need to just produce more. There has to be more out there. And that in turn will lead to an expansion of thematic choice. In a sense, we need diversity of themes as well as diversity in other areas.